So now we're going to get started with a few examples in the KORG Polysix, and you can really get some pretty classic sounds out of this pretty easily, as the nature of a lot of these sounds aren't too complex, but you can obviously add your own bits of flair along the way to make your sounds a little bit more unique than just some of these ideas. So as we go through our few examples, we're just going to do just that, get some ideas, and it's always worth exploring more than just what we do here, but we'll start by making ourselves a sound somewhat similar to the fat line bass. So a somewhat simple sound there to work towards, and we'll start with an initialized program. We won't aim for exactly the fat line bass, but something along those lines. So let's start with our oscillator. If we wanted to go with one oscillator, we could bring it down an octave and work from that, but I think I'm actually going to leave us up at the 8 feet and add a sub oscillator with that octave under, and then bring our cutoff down and envelope generator intensity up. Then we'll bring our sustain on that envelope down and the decay. To get that shape, we could add in some attack if you want a whip sort of sound to it. And I think I'll go 2 octaves down. And let's go with a pulse width to get a square sort of sound to make this a little bit different. And we'll get a bit of resonance. Bring our attack down so we get that transient part of the sound. Maybe we will go down an octave and get our sub at 1 octave under. I think that works better for how I have things set up and where I'm playing on the keyboard. Sometimes it may be useful to have the gate instead of envelope for our VCA mode so that you can hold down the low note when you need it. But I think we will keep it on the envelope generator so that it does follow that envelope. And we won't really worry too much about modulation generators or anything. We could run a sequence of this for a running bass line on the arpeggio. We'll leave that off and actually go down here to the key assign. We're going to set it to unison, which that obviously widens it out quite a bit with the 6 voices on that note, but we don't really want to make a bass sound too wide typically, although it's not unheard of if you need that in your situation, but keeping the low end towards the middle of your stereo space is usually a good idea. And with unison also, when we play 2 notes over each other, they will re-trigger, whereas even when we had polyphony and only one voice to play, you won't re-trigger the note that is held after the canceled one. So in terms of playing, it's helpful to do that, and having a few voices gives a bigger sound for this bass. Let's get the analog up. Again, to get some of that pitch change randomly as opposed to actually being just detuned from the other voices by the knob. We'll randomly have just some outliers with some slight variation, and that's how you get the analog sort of sound out of it. And in addition to that, for some more playability, we can use the velocity, which right now is set here. Rather than setting another source, we'll just use the one that's already set in the default patch onto the VCF cutoff. So then the velocity will adjust where our filter is actually located. I'm actually going to hold shift and turn that down a bit because I don't really want too much of it. And so that makes playing it on a keyboard a little bit more interesting. And we could also do something with the modulation generator if we link that to tempo. I'm going to slow it down just a bit too, to 2/16 notes, and we'll have it on the VCF. You can hear it moving around there, but then we can have a repeating arpeggio here. This is set to a 16th note. And you have a rhythmic sort of pumping of the position of the filter on there. And at this point, you could get into doing some effects, maybe a multi-band compressor at the end, which is adding some gain and compressing the low, mid, and high bands so they're a little bit more full each. And maybe before that, you want to have a reverb on a bass. You, again, probably don't want to go too wet. That's a little bit heavy, but maybe if you bring down your wet, maybe turn down your time a bit, you can fill the sound out and do some interesting things with some of those things. Maybe even some overdrive with the wah or some just distortion, which this does end up making it mono, but you can mix some of the dry in with it and just play around and experiment with some of these ideas, some of the effects, or just different routes with things we did along the way different waveform, but it's fun and easy to get a sound that's plenty usable for a bass, whether it's repeating from the arpeggiator or just a single note triggered normally. We'll call that good for our bass sound. We could go ahead and put the tag in as a bass and add an author and then save it as an example bass. And then that would be in our user presets so that we can recall it and use it later. From here, though, we're ready to jump into an example lead in the next video, so I will see you then.